I'd always thought of myself as a fairly straightforward person, someone who believed that marriage was about honesty, trust, and mutual support. 10 years in, I was proud to say I had all of that. Or at least I thought I did. We built a comfortable life, my wife and I, in a modest suburban neighborhood. It wasn't flashy, but it was home, and we were each other's home, or so I believed. But then, it happened. The little cracks in the wall I hadn't noticed began to split wide open. It started small, almost laughably so, an evening when she came home late from a work meeting, wearing a new outfit. Looking more polished than she ever did for me. I brushed it off as silly jealousy, a shadow of insecurity I didn't think belonged in our marriage. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted that shadow more. It was trying to tell me something I didn't want to see. As weeks passed, her absences grew longer, and her explanations shorter. Work trip, she'd say with a casual wave, as though she didn't owe me any more than that. And like a fool, I accepted it, telling myself I was overthinking. Then I found the hotel bill, a simple, small piece of paper tucked in her jacket pocket. It seemed so unassuming, and yet it screamed the truth louder than any words could. I had no idea what to do with it at first. I felt raw, like someone had peeled back my skin and left my heart exposed. Throbbing with a mix of anger, betrayal, and pain, I tried to confront her, but the words caught in my throat. The trust I'd held so dear silencing me in a way I never imagined. That's when the plan formed. If she wouldn't come to me with the truth, I'd bring my truth to her in a way she'd never forget. I told myself that marriage was built on trust, and trust required a measure of blind faith. After all, I had never had a reason to doubt her before. But as the days passed, each subtle change in her behavior became harder to ignore. She used to look at me when she spoke, her eyes fixed on mine as if I were the only person in the room. Even in a crowd. Lately, though, her gaze drifted past me, her focus elsewhere. A slight shift, really, but enough to make me feel like a ghost in my own marriage. It started with the small things. She'd pick up new habits almost overnight, like joining a gym she'd never mentioned or developing a sudden taste for yoga classes. She'd return from these new activities energized, cheeks flushed with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen in years. She began buying clothes that were different. Nothing outrageous, just a touch more stylish, more fitted. Her usual casual look traded for something sharper, more eye-catching. I told myself it was just a phase, maybe her own way of feeling better about herself, of shaking off the monotony we'd fallen into. Still, something in me began to itch with a suspicion that wouldn't fade. I began watching her with a heightened sense of awareness, noticing patterns where I'd never looked before. The way she'd position herself in the house, just out of earshot, murmuring into her phone. I could see her back tense as she answered messages, her lips forming words I couldn't make out. The sight left me hollow, like watching someone paint over the walls of a home I'd built with my own hands. The excuses grew thinner, too. One Friday night, I made her favorite dinner, a small gesture I thought would surprise her. Maybe reignite the connection we'd been losing. I waited, watching the clock tick past 7, then 8, then 9. When she finally came home, there was no apology, just a breezy, "Oh." There was a last-minute meeting with a client. As she kicked off her shoes and headed for the shower, leaving me alone at the table with a meal gone cold, I sat there in silence, holding onto the empty chair across from me as though it might offer some explanation. It wasn't long after that night when she mentioned a business trip. It was nothing new. Her work had always required a bit of travel. But as I watched her pack, I noticed that she chose the red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago. The one she'd never wanted to wear. She folded it carefully, placing it in her suitcase along with a collection of perfume bottles she'd recently started buying. Each scent a mystery to me. My heart twisted in ways I hadn't expected. Still, I stayed quiet, telling myself it was just my imagination. The trust we'd built over 10 years couldn't be undone by a few coincidences. Right, but the nagging feeling persisted, lingering like a shadow over every conversation, every passing glance, every moment she spent on her phone. A voice in the back of my mind grew louder, urging me to dig deeper, to find out what lay beneath this new version of her. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One morning, she left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, a rare oversight. I told myself not to look, to leave her privacy intact, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But curiosity gnawed at me, pulling me closer until I found myself standing over the screen, my eyes scanning the page. I only needed to see one name: a hotel, booked for 2 nights. It was under her name, and it was for the exact dates of her upcoming business trip. My stomach dropped as I stared at the screen, feeling a sickening sense of betrayal rise within me. I hadn't felt like this in years, not since we were young, before trust became our foundation. And here it was, crumbling in my hands. I closed the laptop, backing away as though it had burned me. My thoughts raced, looping through every possible explanation, every excuse I might make for her. But each scenario seemed thinner than the last, and I could no longer ignore the weight pressing down on me. A feeling I can only describe as grief. It wasn't just the betrayal I mourned, it was the life I thought we'd built. The future I thought was ours. For days, I walked around in a daze, going through the motions of daily life while my mind spiraled deeper into a place I'd never been before. Trust was a fragile thing, I realized, built piece by piece over years but shattered in seconds. And here I was, clinging to the broken pieces, trying to make sense of it all. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation, but another part held me back, paralyzed by the fear of what I might hear. Instead, I let my actions speak. I watched her more closely, searching for any sign, any hint that would confirm my suspicions. It was almost surreal, observing my own wife as though she were a stranger, my every instinct screaming at me to uncover the truth. But even as I pieced together the puzzle, I could feel something within me breaking, a silent acceptance that our marriage might be unraveling in ways I couldn't control. The night I found the hotel reservation, I didn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment we'd spent together over the past 10 years. I combed through memories as if searching for clues, signs I might have missed, something that would explain how we'd ended up here. But there was nothing to find, just fragments of the life we'd built, now cast in shadows I hadn't noticed until now. By morning, I felt like a different man, someone burdened with a knowledge I hadn't asked for and didn't want. It was a strange kind of heartbreak, being so close to the truth but still teetering on the edge of denial. But I couldn't turn back now, the need for answers was overwhelming. I decided I would follow through, no matter where it led me. The next few days were a blur. I avoided direct confrontation, but I kept my eyes and ears open, hyper-aware of every move she made. I noticed the extra care she took when she dressed in the morning. How she lingered in front of the mirror with a hint of vanity I hadn't seen before. She seemed almost elated, walking around the house as though floating on some invisible cloud. It tore at me in ways I hadn't expected, seeing her this way while knowing what I knew, realizing that her happiness was built on a lie. And then, one afternoon, I saw it with my own eyes. She told me she was meeting an old friend for lunch, someone she hadn't seen in years. I wanted to believe her, but something in my gut told me to follow. I felt pathetic, sneaking around, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched her from a distance. I felt like a spy in my own marriage, someone forced to play a role I never wanted. When she pulled up to a nearby hotel instead of a restaurant, my worst fears became real. I watched from the parking lot as she stepped out of the car. Her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in years. And then he appeared, a man I didn't recognize, tall and well-dressed, greeting her with a familiarity that burned like salt in an open wound. They embraced, and I felt something inside me snap. A quiet but irrevocable shift. I can't describe the feeling that overcame me in that moment. It was as if the world had gone silent, my mind shutting down to protect me from the reality unfolding before me. I stood there, numb, unable to move, my hands clenched into fists as I watched them disappear into the hotel together. Everything I'd suspected, everything I'd feared, was laid out before me, undeniable and raw. I drove home in a daze, barely aware of my surroundings as the shock settled into a dull ache. My mind reeled with 1,000 questions, each one more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Did she love him? Was I just a convenient part of her life? Someone she kept around for appearances while she pursued a life that had nothing to do with me? The thoughts circled endlessly, each one a fresh wound in a heart that felt broken beyond repair. That night, she came home as though nothing had happened, greeting me with the same detached warmth she'd shown for months. I watched her, searching for any hint of remorse, any sign that she might feel something for what she'd done. But there was nothing, just the practiced ease of someone who had perfected the art of deception. I felt sick, hollowed out by the realization that the woman I'd loved for years was a stranger. Someone I no longer recognized. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, caught in a web of lies that only grew thicker with each passing day. I needed to confront her, to bring the truth into the open, even if it destroyed what little remained of our marriage. But I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of an easy confrontation. If she was going to tear apart everything we'd built, then I would make sure she felt the weight of her betrayal. I would confront her, yes, but on my terms, in a way she would never forget. As I lay awake that night, a plan began to take shape in my mind. I'd wait until her next business trip, the one she'd so carefully scheduled for the upcoming weekend. I'd follow her to the hotel, but this time, I wouldn't stay hidden in the shadows. I would make my presence known, handing her the divorce papers she so richly deserved. It was a small act of revenge, perhaps, but it was the only way I could think to reclaim a part of myself. To take back some measure of control in a situation that had left me feeling helpless. The days leading up to that weekend were some of the longest of my life. I moved through each one in a kind of numb haze, going through the motions of daily life while the storm brewed within me. I watched her pack her bags, selecting the same red dress she'd chosen for her last trip, and felt a wave of anger rise within me. But I kept it hidden, burying it beneath a mask of indifference, knowing that soon enough, the truth would come to light. The day of her business trip arrived, carrying with it a cold, unshakable sense of finality. There was an odd calm in the air, as though the world around me had slowed, giving weight to every second that passed. She left in the early afternoon, bidding me goodbye with a quick smile and a casual wave, as though she was simply heading to the grocery store. I returned the gesture, keeping my voice steady and my expression neutral, knowing it would be the last time I'd watch her walk out that door as my wife. Once she was gone, I took my time gathering everything I'd need: the divorce papers I'd had drawn up in secret, a bag of clothes, and a notebook I'd filled with thoughts and memories over the past weeks. In a way, it felt like a ritual, a means of preparing myself for what lay ahead. Each item I packed felt symbolic, a reminder of who I'd been and who I was becoming as I prepared to sever the bond that had once defined my life. The drive to the hotel felt surreal. I'd memorized the route from my previous visit, the one where I'd hidden in the shadows. But this time was different. There was no more hiding, no more guessing, no more pretending. I knew exactly what I was walking into, and the thought both terrified and liberated me. This was the moment I'd been dreading, but it was also the one I needed to finally put the pieces of my broken heart to rest. When I arrived, I parked across the street, watching as people filtered in and out of the hotel lobby, each stranger oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I felt oddly detached, as though I were watching someone else's life unfold, not my own. The pain, the anger, the betrayal, all of it felt suspended, held at bay by a sense of purpose that overpowered everything else. I checked into a room on the same floor where she'd be staying, making my way up the elevator with a calm that felt foreign. I'd spent so many nights thinking about this moment, imagining how it would feel to finally confront her. But now that I was here, all the anger I'd held on to seemed to fade, replaced by something quieter, more resolute. This wasn't about revenge, I realized. It was about reclaiming my life, about closing a chapter that had already ended. I waited until late afternoon, giving her time to settle in, to think she was safe and secure in her deception. When I finally walked down the hall toward her room, the envelope of divorce papers felt heavy in my hand, a tangible reminder of the betrayal that had led me here. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I knocked on the door, each heartbeat echoing in my ears as I waited. The seconds stretched out, each one a silent reminder of the years we'd spent together, the promises we'd made, the life we'd built. And then the door opened, and there she was, standing in front of me, her face a mixture of shock and horror as she registered my presence. She didn't say a word, but her expression spoke volumes, a silent confession that left no room for doubt. Without a word, I handed her the envelope, watching as she took it with trembling hands. The silence between us was thick, charged with the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, a lifetime of memories that now felt distant and hollow. I could see the realization dawn in her eyes as she opened the envelope, her gaze flickering between the divorce papers and my face, searching for some sign of mercy, some hope of forgiveness. But there was none. I felt strangely calm, detached, as though I were watching this scene unfold from a distance. I didn't feel the anger I'd expected, or the satisfaction I'd imagined. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of closure, a peace that came from finally letting go of the lies, the betrayal, the pain. This was the end, and for the first time in months, I felt free. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I shook my head, silencing her with a look. There was nothing left to say, no words that could mend the rift between us or erase the scars she'd left on my heart. I turned and walked away, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders with each step, the years of love and loss fading into the past with every stride. As I made my way back to my car, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow, a bittersweet recognition of all that we'd been and all that we'd lost. I thought about the life we'd built, the dreams we'd shared, the moments that had once defined us. But those moments were gone, lost to a betrayal that had severed the bond between us beyond repair. I drove home in silence, the weight of the past finally giving way to the promise of a new beginning. I didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it. I'd been through the fire, confronted the truth, and come out the other side with a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. The drive home from the hotel felt like the end of an era, a quiet departure from a life I'd once cherished. The streets passed by in a blur, familiar landmarks blending into a haze as I navigated the city in silence. My mind filled with echoes of the past. Memories came rushing back, unbidden and unrelenting, each one a reminder of what we'd once shared and what we'd lost. The life we'd built together, the future I'd envisioned, all of it now felt distant, like a faded photograph tucked away in a forgotten drawer. Once home, I stood in our living room, feeling the weight of the empty space around me. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the noise of emotions that had filled my life these past few weeks. I looked around, taking in the familiar surroundings, the photos on the wall, the knickknacks we'd collected over the years, each one a testament to the life we'd shared. It was strange, realizing that these things no longer held the same meaning they once had. They were relics of a past I'd outgrown, pieces of a story that no longer felt like my own. I sat down on the couch, letting the memories wash over me, each one a bittersweet reminder of what we'd been. I thought about our first date, the nervous excitement in her eyes as we sat across from each other, both of us stumbling over our words as we tried to make a good impression. I remembered our wedding day, the vows we'd exchanged, the promises we'd made to stand by each other through everything life might throw our way. And for a long time, we built a life together, weathered the storms, and celebrated the victories, but somewhere along the way, we'd lost each other, our connection slowly unraveling until all that was left was a hollow shell of what we'd once been. It was painful, sifting through the memories, each one a reminder of what I thought we'd shared. But as I sat there, I began to realize that it wasn't just her betrayal that had torn us apart. There were moments, subtle and silent, when I had drifted too lost in the routine, caught up in the demands of daily life, assuming that the love we'd built would carry us through without any effort on my part. In a way, I'd been complicit in our distance, oblivious to the gaps forming between us, believing that what we had was unbreakable. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on those moments more and more, gaining a clearer understanding of how we'd arrived at this point. It was a strange kind of clarity, painful yet illuminating, revealing the ways I'd fallen short, the times I'd taken her for granted without even realizing it. I'd been so sure of our love, so confident that nothing could shake the foundation we'd built. But love, I realized, was a living thing, a bond that needed tending, care, and attention. I'd been so wrapped up in the security of our marriage that I'd forgotten to nurture the very thing that had brought us together in the first place. These realizations didn't erase her betrayal, nor did they lessen the pain of what she'd done, but they offered me a new perspective, a way of understanding the past that allowed me to move forward without bitterness. I could see the cracks now, the moments when we'd drifted apart, the ways we'd both contributed to the distance that had ultimately consumed us. And while it didn't excuse her actions, it helped me find a sense of peace, a way to let go of the anger and resentment that had weighed me down. Slowly, I began to reclaim my life, piece by piece. I started by clearing out the remnants of our shared history, the photos, the mementos, the little reminders of a life that was no longer mine. I packed him away, not out of anger, but out of a desire to create space for something new, something that was entirely my own. It was a small act, but it felt symbolic, a way of closing the door on a chapter that had defined me for so long. I took up old hobbies, rediscovering the things I'd once loved but had let slip away over the years. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages, people who knew me before my marriage, who reminded me of the person I'd been before I became someone's husband. I found solace in their company, a comfort I hadn't expected, as though they were helping me piece together the parts of myself that I'd forgotten. And in the quiet moments, when the loneliness crept in, I reminded myself that this was a new beginning. I no longer needed to hold on to the past, to dwell on the mistakes we'd made or the ways we'd hurt each other. I was free to forge my own path, to create a life that was mine alone, unburdened by the weight of a broken marriage. As weeks turned into months, I found a new sense of purpose, a quiet strength that had emerged from the ashes of my old life. I no longer felt defined by the betrayal, no longer haunted by the memories of what had been. Instead, I felt a sense of gratitude, a strange but undeniable appreciation for the journey I'd been through. It had been painful, yes, but it had also been transformative, revealing parts of myself I hadn't known existed. In the end, I realized that the greatest gift I could give myself was forgiveness, not just for her, but for myself, for the ways I'd fallen short, for the mistakes I'd made along the way. Forgiveness became my way forward, a means of letting go of the past and embracing the future with an open heart. In the months that followed, I learned what it meant to live with silence, not the suffocating quiet that had filled my marriage in its final days, but a new kind of peace. It was a silence that belonged only to me, an emptiness that I could fill with my own thoughts, my own dreams, and my own ambitions. I hadn't realized how much I'd lost myself in the life we'd shared, how deeply I'd merged my identity with the idea of being someone's husband. Now, without that role defining me, I was free to discover who I was, to rebuild my life on my own terms. At first, the change was subtle. I started small, focusing on the routines that had once felt meaningless but now offered a strange sense of comfort. Mornings became my sanctuary, a quiet time to sit with my thoughts, sipping coffee as the sun crept over the horizon. I found solace in these early hours, a chance to reflect on the day ahead without the weight of the past bearing down on me. It was in these moments that I began to feel the stirrings of something new, a hope, a quiet resilience that I hadn't felt in years. Gradually, I branched out, reintroducing myself to the world in ways that felt authentic. I took up jogging, something I hadn't done since my 20s, letting the rhythm of my footsteps and the rush of fresh air clear my mind. I began reading again, diving into novels and memoirs, finding comfort in the stories of others who'd faced their own struggles and emerged stronger. Each book felt like a companion, a reminder that pain was universal, but so was the possibility of renewal. But the most transformative change came when I decided to pursue a passion I'd long buried under the obligations of marriage and career: woodworking. It had been a hobby I'd cherished in my younger days, a craft that allowed me to create something tangible with my own hands. I bought a set of tools, some raw wood, and set up a small workspace in the garage. At first, it was just a way to fill the hours, to keep myself busy, but over time, it became something more: a therapy of sorts, a means of channeling my emotions into something productive. There was something deeply satisfying about working with wood, the feel of the grain beneath my fingers, the slow, methodical process of shaping each piece into something new. I spent hours in the garage, lost in the rhythm of sanding, cutting, and shaping, each movement a meditation, a release. The finished pieces weren't always perfect, but they were mine, a reflection of the journey I was on. I found myself proud of these creations, small as they were, each one a symbol of my resilience, my ability to rebuild. As the months passed, I began to feel a sense of wholeness I hadn't known was possible. The pain of the betrayal still lingered, a scar that would always be there, but it no longer defined me. I had found a way to integrate it into my story, to accept it as part of my past without letting it dictate my future. It was a slow, gradual process, but each day brought a little more healing, a little more clarity. One evening, as I sat in my living room, surrounded by the quiet comfort of my own company, I realized that I was no longer waiting for something to fill the void. I was content, truly content, in a way I hadn't been in years. There was a richness to this solitude, a depth I hadn't expected. I was learning to savor my own presence, to find joy in the small, simple moments that made up my days. And then, almost without meaning to, I began to open myself up to the idea of companionship again. It wasn't a decision I made lightly, nor was it something I actively sought out. But as I spent time with old friends, reconnecting over dinners and long conversations, I realized that I no longer carried the fear or hesitation that had once held me back. I was ready, in my own quiet way, to let someone new into my life, to share the parts of myself that had been hidden away. Dating felt different this time around. I no longer felt the need to impress or conform, to mold myself into someone else's idea of a perfect partner. Instead, I was unapologetically myself, open and honest about my past, my scars, and the lessons I'd learned along the way. I found myself drawn to people who shared that same sense of authenticity. Individuals who had walked their own paths of heartbreak and healing, who understood that love was something to be built slowly, carefully, with respect and mutual understanding. It wasn't long before I met someone who shared that vision, someone who accepted me as I was, scars and all. There was no rush, no urgency to define what we had. We took our time, allowing the connection to grow naturally, building a foundation of trust and respect. It was a quiet, steady love, one that felt safe, grounded, and real, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, ready to embrace the future with open arms. Looking back on the journey I'd been through, I felt a sense of gratitude, a quiet appreciation for the pain that had led me here. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss, all of it had been a catalyst, a means of stripping away the illusions I'd held onto, forcing me to confront the parts of myself I'd neglected. It had been a painful, humbling process, but it had also been transformative, a chance to rediscover who I was at my core. As I moved forward, I carried those lessons with me, a reminder of the resilience I'd found within myself, the strength that had emerged from the darkest moments of my life. I no longer felt defined by the past, no longer haunted by the mistakes we'd made or the hurt we'd caused. Instead, I felt free to love, to live, to create a life that was entirely my own. In the end, I realized that the journey wasn't about finding closure or moving on, it was about finding myself, reclaiming the parts of me that had been lost along the way. And in doing so, I found a peace that was deeper and more enduring than anything I'd ever known. As I closed this chapter of my life, I felt a quiet joy, a sense of fulfillment that needed no external validation. I had become whole, not because I'd found love again, but because I'd learned to love myself, to embrace the journey with all its messiness, all its pain, and all its beauty. As time went on, I learned that healing isn't a straight line. Some days were filled with contentment and peace, moments of joy that felt like little victories. But there were still days when the memories crept back in, reminders of the life I'd left behind and the dreams that hadn't panned out. I'd feel a pang of sadness, a shadow of the betrayal, but it no longer held the power it once did. Instead, it was just a part of me, a small chapter in a story that was still being written. In these quiet moments, I found strength in a new approach to life. Rather than looking backward, I focused on building a future that was true to who I had become. I poured myself into my woodworking, finding ways to turn it into something more than a hobby. I began selling my pieces online, each one carrying a bit of my story, a reminder that beauty could emerge from even the most painful experiences. As the orders grew, so did my confidence, and what had started as a way to pass the time became a new venture. A small business that felt like an extension of myself. It was strange, this sense of purpose that had come from something so unexpected. My workbench became my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the craft. Each cut and sanding stroke a reminder of the resilience I'd found within myself. Every piece I created felt like a testament to the journey I'd been on. A tangible reminder that I could shape my life in the same way I shaped wood, with patience, intention, and a willingness to embrace the imperfections. One day, as I finished a piece for a client, I realized how much I'd changed. There was a sense of peace that hadn't been there before, a quiet confidence that came from knowing I'd survived the worst and come out the other side. I'd built something from the wreckage of my marriage, something that was mine alone, a life that reflected who I was, not who I'd once thought I needed to be. Gradually, I found myself surrounded by people who shared this new chapter with me, friends who had seen me at my lowest, colleagues who respected my work, and yes, even the new woman who had come into my life with a gentle understanding and a quiet strength that mirrored my own. Our relationship was different from anything I'd known, a partnership rooted in honesty and mutual respect. There was no need to rush, no pressure to mold ourselves into some idealized version of a couple. We took each day as it came, appreciating the simplicity of shared moments, the quiet contentment that grew between us. I found joy in the little things, the laughter we shared over dinner, the long walks where conversation came easily, the nights spent in comfortable silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts but connected in a way that felt natural and unforced. She knew my past, understood the scars I carried, but she never saw them as a burden. Instead, she accepted them as part of who I was, and in doing so, she taught me to do the same. As our relationship deepened, I found myself grateful for the journey that had led me here, the twists and turns that had brought me to this place of quiet fulfillment. I realized that the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the pain had all been necessary steps, pushing me toward a life that was richer and more authentic than anything I'd known before. One evening, as I sat on the porch with her beside me, watching the sunset cast a golden glow over the yard, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I looked back on the life I'd left behind, the dreams that had crumbled, the love that had faded, and I felt no anger, no bitterness. Instead, there was only acceptance, a quiet recognition that every moment, every experience, had shaped me into the person I was today. For so long, I'd thought of my marriage as the foundation of my life, the anchor that held me steady. But now, I understood that I was my own foundation, my own anchor. I didn't need someone else to complete me. I was whole on my own. A truth that had taken years and a great deal of pain to realize. I'd built a life that was mine, filled with people and passions that reflected who I was, not who I'd once tried to be for someone else. As the years went by, this new life became my reality, a chapter I'd written with my own hands and heart. I grew comfortable with the quiet, the solitude that had once felt like a burden but now felt like a gift. I learned to find beauty in the small moments, to appreciate the peace that came from living authentically, without the need to prove or please. And in that simplicity, I found a happiness that was deeper and more enduring than anything I'd ever known. Looking back now, I can see that the journey was never about finding closure or seeking revenge. It was about discovering myself, embracing the person I'd become through all the ups and downs, the heartbreaks and healing. I no longer needed the validation of a perfect marriage or the approval of others to feel whole. I was enough. And that realization brought a freedom I'd never thought possible. In the end, I realized that life is a series of seasons, each one with its own lessons, its own beauty, and its own challenges. My marriage had been one season, a time of love and growth, but it had also been a season of pain and betrayal. And while it had left scars, it had also led me to this place of peace, a life that was authentically mine. I knew that there would be other seasons, other journeys, other moments of joy and heartbreak, but whatever lay ahead, I felt ready to face it, armed with the resilience I'd found within myself and the quiet confidence that had come from rebuilding my life. I was no longer defined by the past, no longer held captive by the dreams that hadn't come true. I was free, and that freedom was a gift I would carry with me always. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a warm, golden glow, I felt a sense of closure, not just with my past, but with every chapter of my life that had led me here. This was my life, my story, and for the first time, I felt truly at peace.